When I found out that my wife was cheating on me with a wealthy man, I decided to take action. I was sure I could find evidence of her betrayal, but what I discovered later exceeded all expectations. It turned out that her secrets ran much deeper, and the truth she was hiding could destroy our marriage forever. Revenge was inevitable, but was I ready for what was coming next? Stay until the end to find out how it all ends. Lauren accidentally finds a message on his wife's phone. Is it just a coincidence, or is there something more? His doubts only grow, but is he ready to learn the truth? Lauren sat at his desk, bitterly glancing at the clock. A few hours remained until the end of the workday, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Since the morning, he couldn't get Annette's words from a few days ago out of his head. Adam invited me to stay with his kids for a few days, Lauren. I can really help him. There's so much work to do. She had said it so casually, as if it was nothing. But those words burned inside him like a fire that wouldn't go out. What did it really mean? A few days? Why hadn't she mentioned it before? Lauren couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Usually, his wife was very open with him, but lately, he had sensed a certain distance, as if an invisible wall had formed between them. She had been spending more time at work, staying late, or sometimes not coming home at all, as if she was caught up in something important. That day, Lauren came home earlier than usual. He walked into the kitchen and saw Annette standing by the stove, cooking dinner. She looked normal, but he noticed how nervously she stirred the food, avoiding his gaze. "How was your day?" he asked, sitting at the table. "Everything's fine," she replied, and he noticed her voice was slightly lower than usual. "I decided to cook dinner a little later because Adam invited me to stay over again today. He has a lot of difficult tasks to handle." Lauren felt his heart tighten. This no longer seemed like just work. It was as if she was confirming his worst fears. "How long do you plan to stay?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. Annette hesitated for a second. "Probably a few days," she finally answered, still avoiding his gaze. "He really needs a lot of help with the kids, and I can't say no." Lauren felt a growing pressure inside him. He heard her words, but they didn't match what he felt. He had a strong sense that there was more to this situation than just work, and that thought filled him with deep concern. "Are you leaving now?" he asked as Annette walked toward the door. "Yes, I'm staying over at his place again tonight," she said without turning around. "He has a lot going on, and I can't leave them alone." Lauren sat at the table, watching as she left the house. She didn't even kiss him goodbye like she used to. If he hadn't known they had been together for years, he would have thought that distance had already formed between them. And maybe it wasn't just emotional. That night, he couldn't sleep peacefully. He woke up at every noise, every sound from the street, as if something was preventing him from resting. One question kept repeating in his mind: why? In the morning, he decided to do something he had never done before: check her phone. She always left it on the kitchen table when she went to work or out with friends. Lauren never liked invading personal space, but this time, his curiosity was too strong. He quietly walked over to the table and picked up her phone. A few messages on the screen immediately caught his attention. They were all from Adam. He read a few, but one, in particular, stood out. "Are you staying the night? I really need you to be here. You know how hard it is without your help." Lauren felt his heart start to race. This no longer seemed like just a working relationship. Adam was asking her for something more than just help with the kids. Lauren took a deep breath and decided he couldn't just stand by anymore. A few hours later, he drove to Adam's place. He didn't know what to expect, but he had no other choice. He had to know the truth. When he arrived, he saw Annette walking out of Adam's house. She didn't notice him as he stood on the opposite side of the street. But Lauren saw her, and her expression was calm, even slightly distant, as she got into Adam's car, which was waiting for her at the door. Lauren stood there, watching them, and his heart clenched with jealousy and disappointment. What was he supposed to do now? Would he be able to uncover the whole truth? And if she was cheating on him, could he ever forgive her? This is only the beginning, and with each new step, Lauren is getting closer to the truth, one that could change his life forever. Lauren stands on the doorstep, watching as his wife drives away with Adam. What will he do next? Is he ready to face the truth that could tear everything apart? Lauren couldn't take his eyes off the car as it slowly drove away. Their home, which once felt safe and reliable, had now become a place where he could find no peace. A storm of doubts and fears raged in his heart, but he knew one thing. He couldn't just sit and wait any longer. He waited a few minutes until the car disappeared around the corner, and then, without hesitation, he began to follow them. He didn't have enough evidence to fully understand the situation, but his intuition told him this wasn't just a coincidence. Something felt wrong. Lauren wasn't a detective, but he knew that sometimes you had to take risks if you wanted to uncover the truth. And that's exactly what he was after now. He walked after them down a quiet street, trying not to make any noise. After a few blocks, he saw Adam park in front of a large house with dark windows. It looked like just another ordinary suburban retreat, but to Lauren, it was another red flag. Adam's car stopped, and Lauren watched as Annette stepped out and walked toward the house, which Adam opened for her. There was something unnatural in the way they moved, too comfortable with each other, as if they weren't just colleagues but something more. Lauren stopped a few meters from the gate, carefully observing without making any sudden moves. He held his phone in his hands and quietly took a few pictures. "What are you doing, Annette?" he thought as he watched her. "What happened to us?" His thoughts were interrupted by the sounds coming from inside the house. Lauren could make out fragments of a conversation. Though they weren't clear, it sounded like they were arguing. His heart started pounding faster. "You both don't understand," Adam's voice echoed. Lauren couldn't catch all the words, but he could tell this wasn't just a conversation about the kids. They were talking about something else, something important to both of them. Lauren nervously paced around the yard, trying to decide what to do next. He didn't have the courage to just walk into the house and demand answers. He listened as their voices grew louder. "I have to go," he heard Annette say a few minutes later. Her voice sounded both uncertain and firm at the same time. "Don't you want to stay a little longer?" Adam's voice responded. "No, I need to go home," Annette replied. "I can't leave things like this." At that moment, Lauren knew he couldn't just stand aside anymore. He stepped forward decisively, gathering all his strength. He couldn't allow himself to let this go. He had to know the truth. He sneaked up to the window and quietly peeked inside. Adam and Annette were sitting on the couch, and there was clear tension between them. Lauren saw Adam reach out his hand, and Annette instinctively placed hers in his. Their eyes met, and Lauren felt his heart skip a beat. "This can't be real," he thought as he watched the scene unfold. Suddenly, Adam glanced toward the door, and Lauren quickly hid behind a bush, hoping he hadn't been spotted. He stayed silent, knowing he had to wait for the right moment to confront them. A few minutes later, the front door opened, and Annette stepped outside. Lauren hid so she wouldn't notice him, but she didn't seem to pay attention to her surroundings. She didn't look back. He followed her, feeling his chest tighten with every step. Eventually, they reached her car, and Lauren decided to step closer. As she got into her vehicle and started the engine, he walked up to her window. "You need to explain to me what's going on," he said quietly but firmly. Annette turned her head, and Lauren saw her face turn pale. She trembled. "Lauren, you don't understand," she began, but he cut her off. "I see everything, Annette, and I want to hear the truth. What happened to us? Why are you staying with him, and why couldn't you tell me before?" A wave of doubt flashed in her eyes. She was silent for a few seconds before finally saying, "I don't know how to explain it. Adam, he really just needed help, but I can't hide it anymore. There's more between us than just work. It's all gotten so complicated." "So, you're cheating on me with him?" Lauren asked, his voice trembling with anger and pain. She lowered her head, and for a moment, it looked like she was about to cry. "It's not what you think," she said quietly, "but I know that won't matter to you. You've already made up your mind." Lauren stood in front of her car, feeling as if his entire world was collapsing. He knew this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. Lauren stood before Annette, and his words felt like a verdict. She tried to explain her actions, but it felt more and more like a complicated game, one where he no longer knew if he had a chance to win. Annette glanced nervously at Lauren, her hands trembling as they gripped the steering wheel. She could no longer look her husband in the eyes because she knew he would see the whole truth, even if she didn't say it out loud. "You're cheating on me," Lauren said coldly, as if each word was a heavy stone falling onto his heart. I saw it. I heard your conversations, Annette. She swallowed hard, as if trying to swallow the pain filling her chest. Lauren, you don't understand. It's complicated. I don't know how to explain it to you. I never meant. Then why did you stay? Lauren interrupted, his voice rising slightly, a nervous edge creeping in. Why didn't you tell me earlier? I would have done anything to help you. Annette closed her eyes and sighed. She was on the edge. Her plans, her thoughts, everything was crumbling. And now Lauren stood before her like a heavy weight, demanding explanations she didn't have. I couldn't tell you. I feel lonely, Lauren. Her voice softened, but sadness was evident in every word. Adam, he changed my perspective, my understanding of what I wanted from this life. He gave me something you haven't given me in a long time. Lauren felt his heart clench at her words. He looked at her, his gaze wounded yet filled with anger. What are you saying? I didn't give you what you needed? We've been together for 10 years, Annette, and you couldn't find that in me? She sighed again, the pain clear on her face. I don't know, Lauren. I don't know. But with him, I feel important. I feel like I'm not just a shadow to someone. I feel wanted. Do you understand? He was silent, stunned, unable to find the words. Lauren stood in front of her car, but in his mind, everything was spinning like a chaotic storm. And what do you want now? He said through clenched teeth. For me to just forgive all of this? For us to go back to the way things were? Annette looked at him, visibly drained. Her eyes searched his, but she had no answers to give. I don't know what I want, she said, her voice trembling. I don't know if I can just leave it all behind. Adam, he knows what I need. Lauren felt his thoughts cloud over. He wasn't prepared for this. He wasn't ready to be so vulnerable, to allow her to explain her feelings. You want me to understand? To forgive you? He repeated, this time without emotion, just stating the facts. I don't know if I can do that. It's all too complicated now. Too many lies, Annette. I can't just turn a blind eye to this. She watched as he took a step back, as if distancing himself from her, and her heart clenched. She didn't know if she could fix this, if she could regain the trust she had shattered. And that terrified her more than she was willing to admit. I love you, Lauren, she said, her voice softer than before. And I don't want to lose you. But I can't tell you that none of this mattered. I want you to understand that this wasn't just nothing. Lauren let out a laugh, but there was no joy in it. It was the kind of laugh born out of despair. He was no longer the same Lauren who had felt secure in the relationship they had built. His trust had been broken. And you think I can just forget all of this? That you can just ask for forgiveness? He asked, his voice empty, devoid of hope. Annette turned away, staring at the road ahead. I don't know how to fix this, she whispered. I don't know how to take it all back. Well, then maybe it's best to leave things as they are, Lauren said, his voice teetering on the edge of despair. I can't keep living like this, and I don't even know if you actually want to fix it. And with that, he turned around, not waiting for a response. His steps were heavy, and his heart felt like an empty void that could never be filled. Lauren walked a few steps, and suddenly, a wave of crushing disappointment hit him. He wasn't ready for this. He wasn't ready to understand what he had truly lost. But now, he had no choice but to move forward, even if he wasn't sure whether he could ever forgive, or even survive this. This was just a part of their journey. All the questions remained open, and the future promised even more twists that would force Lauren and Annette to rethink their lives. Lauren returned home again, but this time, he didn't feel the same sense of peace. Annette was sitting in the kitchen, but she wasn't alone. The man he had seen before was standing next to her. Lauren didn't know if this was the catastrophic turn he had feared, or if it no longer even mattered. Everything had changed. Lauren felt as if everything that remained of their former life was shattering inside his chest. He raised his hand to the door and, without hesitation, stepped inside. Annette was sitting at the table, and in front of her stood the man who already seemed too familiar to her. It was Adam. I don't think this is what you wanted to see, Lauren, Adam said as soon as Lauren entered the room. Lauren stopped, unsure of what would happen next. His heart pounded faster, and one question kept spinning in his mind. What else are they hiding? Is this serious? He swallowed hard, looking at Annette. You're here with him? After everything? Annette lifted her gaze but said nothing. Her eyes were filled with sadness and confusion, as if she didn't know how to explain what was happening. Adam stood up and walked toward Lauren, looking him straight in the eyes, as if trying to determine whether this was just the result of emotional tension. I came to help Annette, Adam said calmly, as if this was just a normal situation. She can't be alone anymore, Lauren. Help. Lauren repeated, almost not believing his own words. And this is your version of help? Sitting here with my wife? You really don't understand what you're doing. Adam stepped closer, his expression turning serious. Don't blame me for something you don't understand, Lauren. Maybe you forgot, but I knew Annette before you two got together. I was in her life long before you. Lauren felt those words cut through him like a blade. He hadn't known that Adam had a past with Annette, and the revelation struck him to his core. Are you saying this was all about you? He asked, trying to control his voice. That you've been waiting to take her from me? Adam didn't answer right away, and in the silence of the room, Lauren felt as if everything around him was becoming surreal. He had thought that he and Annette could still rebuild something, but now he wasn't sure. Annette nervously stood up from her seat. She glanced at Adam and said she wanted to speak with Lauren alone. I don't want you to blame him, she said, her voice trembling from the tension. This isn't his fault. Then whose fault is it? Lauren replied, unable to hide his resentment. You went to him, Annette. You broke our promises. You didn't stay loyal to me. Annette looked at him, her expression exhausted and broken. I made a mistake, Lauren, she admitted, unable to hold back her tears. But it's not that simple. I lost myself. I felt like I was just a shadow of who I used to be. Adam, he made me feel important again, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Lauren stood in silence, listening to her. He didn't know if he could ever regain what they once had, but he also couldn't just let it go so easily. And now what? He asked coldly. What do we do now? Do you want to stay with him? Do you want to forget about us? Annette was silent, unable to find the right words. She stepped closer to him and reached out her hand, but Lauren stepped back, refusing to let her near. I don't know, she answered quietly, feeling her heart clench with pain. I don't know if I can fix this, Lauren. Do you want me to choose between you and him? I can't do that. Adam silently watched them, not interfering, but he knew for sure that his presence was only making the situation worse. He didn't know why he was here, but he instinctively felt that everything could unravel very quickly. If you don't know what to do, then I'll make the decision for you, Lauren said sharply, his words breaking through the silence like thunder in a quiet sky. Annette turned to him, her eyes filled with pain. You want to leave me? She asked, her voice barely audible, trembling. You want me to go? I can't handle that, Lauren. Adam raised a hand, as if trying to calm them both down. Don't do this, he said, his voice calm but firm. I don't want both of you to be trapped by your pride. The decision has to be yours, not mine. Lauren froze, his gaze was hard, but he couldn't deny what he felt. All these months of pain, all these doubts, it was heavier than he had imagined. But at that moment, he realized that the question was not about who he wanted to lose, but whether he could ever regain trust in the person he had loved so deeply. Lauren stood at the doorstep of their home, feeling his blood pulsing in his head. Annette stared at him with a closed-off expression, while Adam, standing beside her, appeared calmer than Lauren could afford to be. But it was that very silence that was the most unsettling. That evening, it became clear that everything he had wanted was destroyed. But that wasn't the biggest shock. Lauren, listen to me, Adam said, as if he already knew Lauren didn't want to hear it. This isn't what you think. Lauren shook his head, unable to accept what was happening. And how am I supposed to understand it, Adam? You didn't just find my wife. You've practically become a part of her. And now you're telling me it's not what it looks like. Annette remained silent, her hands trembling as she sat there, seemingly in the shadow of everything unfolding around her. Lauren couldn't believe they had reached this point. Maybe I didn't understand everything, he swallowed hard. Maybe I trusted blindly. But how can I forgive if I don't even know why you started all this in the first place? Annette looked at him, her eyes reflecting all the bitterness and sadness she carried inside. She tried to speak, but her voice faltered. "I want to tell you the truth, Lauren," she finally said, her voice shaking but firm. "But it's not that simple." Lauren couldn't understand what she was trying to say. He felt that something even darker was on the horizon. And then, Annette revealed something he never expected. "I'm pregnant." Her words came out softly, but Lauren felt his heartbeat slow down. He looked at her, not comprehending what he had just heard. "What are you saying?" His voice was filled with shock. "How could you hide this from me?" Annette remained silent, and Lauren felt a dark cloud rising, wrapping around them both. It felt as if every part of his world was crumbling. "I didn't know what to do," she said, her face twisted in pain. "I couldn't tell you before. I couldn't bring myself to because I was afraid of losing you. You already know I was with Adam, but that's not everything." Lauren stood still, trying to process what was happening. This was more than just betrayal. There was something even deeper beneath it all. Why had she hidden the pregnancy? What else hadn't she told him? "Are you saying that this child isn't mine?" His words came out with both pain and disbelief. Annette stood up, lowering her head. "It's not yours," she whispered. "It's from another man. From Jason. I left him a long time ago, but when I met you, I tried to change everything." Lauren froze. Everything he thought, everything he believed, suddenly crumbled into dust. This wasn't just betrayal. This was a complete destruction of everything he understood about their relationship. "You cheated on me not only with Adam, but with someone I don't even know," he shouted, his voice hoarse from anger. "And now you're telling me the child is his?" Adam took a step back, sensing that they were stepping onto dangerous ground. But his expression was no longer as cold as before. He realized the situation was taking a turn neither of them had expected, and all he could do was watch it unfold. Annette stood up and tried to move toward Lauren, but he stepped back. "I couldn't tell you, Lauren," she continued, struggling to find the words. "It was too complicated. I thought I could fix everything once we were together. But now I see that I've made more mistakes than you could ever imagine." Lauren stood like a stone, his eyes burning with pain and resentment. He couldn't understand how this had all become possible. "So who are you, really?" he asked, his voice turning cold and ruthless. "I don't need you anymore. I can't be with you after all this." Annette was silent, her tears rolling quietly down her face. She knew she couldn't regain Lauren's trust, and she knew there was no way to fix what had been broken. But Lauren couldn't continue living with this lie, with all the betrayals they carried together. Adam took a step forward, as if finally deciding to step out of the shadows. "Lauren, you have to understand that life isn't black and white," he said, looking at him with a newfound expression. "But you have the right to choose, and this is your moment." Lauren looked at him, and though his anger was beginning to fade, the disappointment still ran deep. "You're right," he said quietly but firmly, "and I choose. I'm leaving. This is the end." And with those words, Lauren walked out of the house, knowing he had just begun a new chapter of his life. But the biggest lesson he had learned was not how it ended. It was how he should have seen the truth sooner. Only when the door closed behind him did he realize that he had lost more than just love. He had lost himself. Lauren took a few steps, and it felt like each step was sealing his fate. He turned back toward the door, feeling the weight of betrayal and grief pulling him backward. But something inside him had changed. He was no longer the same man he had been before this moment. Lauren's footsteps echoed heavily as he approached the exit. He didn't look back. For the first time in his life, he felt like he wasn't just walking away from Annette. He was walking away from himself, from everything that had been left behind. And this was more than just betrayal. This was an irreversible break between who he had been and who he had become. But the final stamp on his life had not yet been set. "Lauren!" Annette's voice called after him. Her words cut deep, but he didn't stop. "Wait, I have something else to say." Lauren raised his hand to stop her. He didn't want to hear anything more. But his curiosity won. He turned back to her. "What else do you want to say?" His voice was cold, but his eyes carried a deep exhaustion. Annette stepped closer, her face showing a struggle, but also a desperate attempt to explain the impossible. You need to know something important, she began, her voice trembling. What I just told you, that's not everything. I couldn't tell you before, but now that everything is ruined, I can't stay silent any longer. Lauren furrowed his brows, looking at her with disbelief. His mind couldn't process what was happening, and his heart refused to accept the truth. And now what? Are you going to tell me you cheated on me again? That there's another secret? It's not like that, Lauren, she denied, stepping forward. It's not what you think. The silence that followed was so heavy it felt like it was pressing against his chest. I have another child, Lauren, she said, her words cutting through the air. I've been hiding it from you all these years. She's Jason's. Lauren stepped back as if something had exploded inside him. Each word he heard was heavier than the last. That's impossible, he whispered. You can't just say that. I've endured everything. I've survived everything, but I was afraid. Annette paused for a moment. I was afraid that if you knew the truth, you wouldn't want to be with me. And I loved you so much that I couldn't risk losing even the chance to be with you. Lauren stared at her, not knowing what to do. He felt like the years of his life had been nothing but a cruel game, where every day he had been part of a tangled lie. And now what? He asked, his voice sounding as if he were speaking to himself. Do you expect me to forgive all this? To stay? Annette lowered her eyes, her tears streaming down her cheeks, but she couldn't stop. She had done everything she could to hold on to Lauren, but deep down, she knew this moment had been coming for a long time. I don't think you can forgive me, Lauren, she said, but I had to tell you. You deserve to know, and I can't keep it inside any longer. Lauren was silent. He didn't know what to do with this truth. All he knew was that his life would never be the same again. And then, he thought about Jason, the perfect friend, the one who had always been there, unknowingly woven into his life. But now, everything was clear. Jason and Annette, their secret world, the one he had never seen. Lauren felt his heart clench, but it wasn't just because of the betrayal. He had to accept that he himself had been part of this deception. Lauren. Annette softly whispered his name, and that was the final push. Lauren couldn't take it anymore. He took a few steps back and then quickly walked out of the house. Annette remained standing in the hallway, powerless and without hope. Her life, her choices, her terrible mistake. All of it now lay on her like a dark, crushing weight. But the worst part came when Lauren looked back at his life and realized that this betrayal wasn't just a coincidence. It was a reflection of his own weakness, and he could no longer deny it. The truth itself had turned out to be harsher than all of his assumptions. Now, all that was left was the road ahead, and he knew he had to walk it alone. Lauren stood in the dark corridor, feeling the weight of Annette's words pressing down on his shoulders. And though he had long been ready for her betrayal to be exposed, the real blow had come only now. She hadn't just betrayed him. She had hidden from him the worst of all. Lauren felt his blood tighten in his veins. He couldn't stop the rage that suddenly consumed him. Annette's words echoed in his head, and with each new realization, he felt himself losing more and more control. He was standing on the edge, and if he took one wrong step, he might completely fall apart. He stood in front of her bedroom door, hesitating, unsure if he should even go inside. And just as his hand finally rested on the doorknob, he heard her voice from behind the door. Lauren, please, don't go. Her words were filled with pain, but she didn't dare ask for forgiveness. She already knew that everything was lost. I can explain everything. Lauren turned around, his face cold as ice. No need for explanations, Annette. I heard your words. I saw everything I needed to see. I can't stay with a woman who has been lying to me for years. His voice didn't waver, but there was something else in his eyes. Not anger, but disappointment. He felt like he had stopped being a part of this home a long time ago, like he had forgotten who he truly was. You don't understand, Lauren. Annette stepped closer, her hand gently touching his shoulder. I didn't do this to hurt you. I was afraid you would leave me because I wasn't perfect. It was hard for me to admit that I had a child with another man. I was just scared of your reaction. You were scared? Lauren snapped, his words hitting with such force that she took a few steps back. You were scared? Annette, you cheated on me with my best friend. And now you're trying to justify it. He turned away, pacing the room, unable to leave her alone. The words wouldn't come to him. What else was there to say after everything he had found out? That they had both betrayed him? And this wasn't just a momentary mistake or an unfortunate misstep. This was a deliberate game they had played for years. You don't understand how helpless I felt, Annette whispered, her eyes filled with tears. I didn't know how to stop it. I thought it was just one moment, that I would close my eyes and it would disappear. But then I couldn't escape? Lauren froze in place, struggling to believe her words. How had he not noticed what was happening for so long? How could he have trusted her so blindly, ignoring what had been so obvious? And you're still trying to justify your actions, he said, taking a deep breath. It's just not fair. All these years, I thought we were together, that everything between us was real. And now you're telling me it was all just a lie? Annette didn't answer. She simply stood there in silence, knowing that words wouldn't change anything. But Lauren had already made his decision. It was hard. He didn't know where he would go, but he knew he couldn't stay. There was no room left in his mind for doubts. This was the point of no return. You left me, Annette, long before I ever found out about this. His voice was distant as he moved toward the door. And now I don't know how to be with you anymore, how to live with all of this. Time seemed to freeze as the door shut behind him. She stood in the doorway of their home, swallowed by silence. Meanwhile, Lauren felt his heart grow cold. He was no longer the man he had been before this night. He would have to find a new path, to leave his old world behind. But he didn't know if there would be enough time to do it. Somewhere in the city, far from Lauren's home, Jason watched as everything unfolded. He was good at hiding his emotions, but even he couldn't remain indifferent. Lauren had learned the truth, and that meant there was no way to fix things now. Lauren, I'm sorry, he whispered to himself, knowing that this wouldn't end without consequences for him either. She knew he wouldn't leave, that he would come back and forgive her again. But this time, everything was different. Lauren knew this was his last chance to escape this labyrinth of lies and pain. He sat in his office, his gaze lost in the empty cup on the table. He didn't have the strength to move. His heart pounded heavily, as if refusing to believe what had happened. It was all so absurd. Just yesterday, he had believed their marriage was unbreakable. And today, he no longer knew what to do with it. His thoughts were interrupted by the ringing of his phone. The number was unfamiliar, but Lauren decided to answer. Hello, this is Lauren. His voice was dry and indifferent. Lauren, it's Jason. The familiar voice replied, and something tightened in Lauren's chest. The pressure in his chest grew stronger. He didn't even know what to say. There he was, the friend who had betrayed him more than anyone else. What do you want, Jason? Lauren's voice was emotionless, but an invisible fire burned in his eyes. Do you want to tell me again how you and Annette decided to play your little game? The silence on the other end of the line lasted a long time. Then Jason spoke quietly, almost hopelessly. I know everything, Lauren. I know how you were deceived. And I know that now you want to understand who's truly to blame for all of this. But believe me, this story isn't as simple as it seems. Lauren remained silent. His mind wandered in despair, but Jason's words only raised more questions. He was no longer sure who was at fault, who had done the right thing, and who hadn't. This wasn't just about betrayal. It was an entire web of lies woven by everyone around him. What do you mean? Lauren finally broke, his voice filled with pain. If you're just calling to apologize again, don't bother. I already know everything I need to. No, Lauren, I'm not trying to apologize, Jason replied, sighing. I can't change what happened, but I want you to know the truth. I'm not the only one to blame. What are you trying to say? Lauren stood up, feeling something shift inside him as he realized he still needed answers. I know about the child, Jason said, and the revelation left Lauren completely stunned. What do you mean? He asked, feeling his heart freeze in shock. I know that Annette has a child with another man, Jason spoke slowly, choosing each word carefully as if trying to make Lauren understand that this wasn't just some careless slip. And I know that you had no idea. She never told you. She kept it a secret from you. Lauren felt his heart skip a few beats. This couldn't be true. He simply couldn't believe it. Are you serious? His voice lost its strength, and he sank back into his seat as if his legs had suddenly weakened. I'm not to blame for this, Lauren, Jason answered quietly. I only found out recently, and that's why I decided to call you, to tell you the truth. Maybe it will help you understand why she acted the way she did. Lauren's head was spinning. He felt completely humiliated and deceived. His wife, the woman he had loved, had hidden something this important from him, and now she wasn't even trying to explain her actions. I don't know what to do with all of this, Lauren whispered, almost to himself. You need to find out more, Jason said, and I can help you, if you want. Lauren remained silent. His thoughts were scattered, and he had no idea what to do next. But he knew one thing. He needed to see the whole picture before making a final decision. He couldn't stay in the dark any longer. Fine. I want to know the truth, he said, with a determination he himself didn't fully understand. You will, Lauren. You'll see everything. And now, this isn't just about your wife. This is about your life. And what you want to do with it, Jason said. Lauren ended the call and moved toward the window, where the evening darkness had already settled over the city. He didn't know how much more he could endure, but one thing was clear. He wouldn't let this go unanswered. He understood that the decisions he made in the coming days could change everything. Lauren couldn't believe what he had just learned. His mind had long been consumed by this ruthless game of lies. Now, everything was even more complicated. He wasn't just dealing with betrayal. He was facing a deception he had never even imagined. The next morning, Lauren woke up earlier than usual. Several hours had passed since his conversation with Jason, but his heart was still pounding heavily. He decided he couldn't leave this matter unresolved any longer. He needed to see Annette, to talk to her. She had to explain everything. He got dressed, ate a quick breakfast, though he barely tasted the food, and left the house. His mind was entirely focused on what Jason had said. About the child, Lauren had no idea how to react. How was he supposed to tell Annette that he knew? When he arrived home, she wasn't there. Lauren sat on the couch and waited, but his thoughts wouldn't let him rest. He decided to put all the questions aside for a few minutes and just try to clear his mind. And then his phone rang. "Lauren, it's me," said the voice on the other end. It was Annette. She had always been so gentle, so soft-spoken, but now there was a tension in her voice that Lauren had never heard before. "Where are you?" he asked, trying to keep his tone calm. I'll be there in half an hour. I need to talk to you," she answered, and Lauren felt his heartbeat quicken. He hung up and stood up. What did she want to tell him? What was she hiding now? And why was she acting this way? Half an hour later, the door opened, and Annette walked into the room. She looked the same as always, well-dressed, with a polite smile on her face. But Lauren immediately noticed the tension in her eyes. "Hi," she said as she stepped inside and took off her coat. "Hi," Lauren replied, but his voice was cold and heavy. "You said you wanted to talk. About what?" Annette felt the shift in his mood. She started to fidget, and it was obvious. She sat down on a chair, trying to gather her thoughts. "Lauren, I have to confess something. It's really hard for me to say this, but I can't keep hiding it anymore." Her words sent a shockwave through Lauren, and he couldn't stop himself from asking, You're hiding something from me, Annette? What haven't you told me?" She remained silent for a few seconds, then looked him in the eyes. "Lauren, I never meant for this to happen, but I have a child, and that child is not yours." Annette's words hung in the air, and Lauren felt his entire mind shatter into pieces. He couldn't believe it. "What are you saying?" he asked, his voice nearly trembling with shock. Annette let out a deep sigh before she began to explain. "It was a long time ago, Lauren. I met him before we got married. He was one of my exes, and we had a relationship. But I didn't want to tell you about it. I was afraid you wouldn't understand. You need to know the truth, though I don't even know if you're ready for it." Lauren clenched his fists, his heart pounding so fast that he couldn't focus. He felt like he was being torn apart from the inside. "You don't even care, do you?" he said quietly. "You hid all of this from me, and even now, you're still trying to justify yourself?" Annette started crying. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "I was scared, Lauren. I was afraid this would destroy our relationship. I loved you so much, and I didn't want to lose you. Lauren stood up, his face void of emotion. He walked to the window, staring at the city outside. For all these years, he had believed that their marriage was something special, but now, he realized it had been nothing but a lie. And this child, is it his? He asked. Annette looked down, her tears dripping onto the floor, but she remained silent. Lauren kept speaking, as if he couldn't believe his own words. I just don't understand why you hid this, Annette. You ruined everything. All these years, I was with you, and now I realize I never even knew who you really were. Annette stepped closer to him, leaning toward his shoulder, trying to reach out to him. Lauren, I'm sorry. I was a fool, but I truly love you. He grabbed her wrist and pushed her away. You love me? You love me, yet you've been living with this lie? You deceived me, and that's what hurts the most. And that was it. Annette's lies had shattered any hope of saving their marriage. Lauren knew that it was already over. He was ready to move on, even if it meant leaving behind the woman he once loved. Lauren felt the weight on his heart growing heavier. His relationship with Annette was crumbling before his eyes, and he couldn't even pinpoint the exact moment when everything had fallen apart. Lauren pushed her hand away and turned around, his eyes cold and merciless. Annette couldn't stop her tears, but she still tried to explain. Lauren, you have to understand. This happened before us. It's not what you think. I loved you, but you kept lying. Lauren interrupted. And now you want me to understand? He walked to the door, his voice firm and unwavering. I can't do this anymore. I can't live with someone who constantly hides the truth from me. You can't just tell me this was all so simple, Annette. You lied to me. Lauren, please. She tried to step forward, but he stopped her with a single look. I'm sorry, but this is over. Annette stood in the doorway, watching as Lauren walked away. Her heart was breaking, but she knew it was her fault. But suddenly, the door opened, and another man walked into the room. He was tall, with a serious expression, and his eyes were dark and unreadable. Lauren froze in place, his gaze immediately shifting to the stranger. Who are you? Lauren asked, his voice filled with distrust. The man stepped forward, his voice deep and firm. My name is Kyle. I know you don't understand yet, but there's still one more question you need to ask Annette. Lauren looked bewildered. Who was this man, and why was he here? Annette, seeing the expression on his face, swallowed hard and then quietly said, Kyle, not now. He's not ready. Maybe not, but the truth needs to be told, Kyle replied, his eyes fixed on Annette. Lauren couldn't take it anymore. What are these riddles? What's going on? Kyle slowly spread his hands, as if acknowledging how complicated the situation was. Lauren, he said, you don't know the whole truth. You assumed this was just about betrayal. But there's another part of this story. You don't realize that this isn't just about a child who came into the picture after your wife's infidelity. It's much more complicated than that. Annette kept glancing between Lauren and Kyle, her face filled with anxiety. Her voice grew softer. I couldn't tell you before. Kyle and I, we've both been through a lot. It's hard to explain. Lauren started feeling restless, but he still couldn't grasp why everything was becoming so convoluted. What were they trying to tell him? Are you talking about the child? He asked cautiously. What else do I need to know? Kyle hesitated, glancing at Annette before finally saying quietly, She's not yours, Lauren. The child Annette has is mine. Lauren stood frozen, like a statue of stone. He couldn't believe what he had just heard. You're the father? He asked, his voice numb from shock. Annette nodded, lowering her gaze. It's true. I couldn't bring myself to tell you, but Kyle and I were together before I met you. And this child is his son. Lauren couldn't contain the wave of disappointment and pain crashing over him. His entire reality, the one he had held onto for so long, suddenly crumbled into nothing. You were cheating on me with him? He asked bitterly. And I never even knew? Kyle stepped closer, as if trying to calm Lauren down. It's not as simple as you think. We never wanted things to happen this way. Annette kept it a secret to protect you. Lauren looked at them both before finally speaking through clenched teeth. Seems like I was just a pawn in someone else's game. And now, I don't even know who I can trust anymore." Kyle fell silent, then turned toward the door. Before leaving, he looked back at Lauren. "This is the truth. How you choose to react to it is up to you. But you have to figure out for yourself what really matters." Lauren heard the door close behind him. For a moment, it felt like everything had stopped. But deep down, Lauren knew this story wasn't over yet, and someone else still had a major role to play in his life. The real blow was still ahead. How would you react if you found out that your wife had hidden not just an affair, but also a child from another man she was with before you?